Hi, I'm Neil Hermes and welcome to my bird wrap. This week we've got 4 great stories, one about Australian magpies, a second about the letter-winged kite, a very rare bird from Central Australia, the Waldrapp, an endangered species from Europe, and finally I'm going to ask the question, how many birds are there on the planet? Hi, I'm Neil Hermes and welcome to my weekly bird wrap, where I'm going to bring you 4 great stories from around the world. The first story is a story that's been asked on my Ask Neil page, and Alex has sent in a question concerning Australian magpies. Australian magpies are a common bird across Australia, but there are different forms of the magpie, and of course at this time of the year they're very conspicuous. The young are coming out and people are often seeing them on lawns and around gardens, and some people are noticing that there are actually different forms of magpies as well as the young magpies. So across Australia there are essentially 3 different sorts of magpies, and you can see in the photographs attached to this clip. One of the forms has a black back. It has a little bit of white on the back of the neck, but essentially the back is black, and that's the common one along the east coast. In southern Australia, the back is completely white, and you'll see in the photograph there's a bird with a completely white back. And in Western Australia there's a form that has something that's partway between. It's sort of partly white, partly black. They're all Australian magpies and they're different forms. Sometimes they'll be given different names, the white-backed magpie, the black-backed magpie, etc. But essentially they're all the same, well, they are all the same species. Of course, the birds I've just described are the males. The females are similar, but they tend to have a little bit more grey on the back. Now, this time of the year, you'll also be seeing young birds, and there's a photograph of a young bird. They always look, in the first 3 months, they look very soft and fluffy. They have a bit of grey through their black. And they stand out more or less, and if you can't tell from the birds how it looks, you'll certainly tell when the parents come up and feed it, because they make a lot of noise. So the young magpies look a little different, and it takes them a year or 2 to get into their full adult plumage. The second story I'd like to do today is about the letter-winged kite. Now, this is one of my bucket birds. The letter-winged kite is an extraordinarily rare inland species of hawk from the arid parts of Australia. Essentially, it's only found along the Strzelecki track, which is was a dirt track and is becoming much more developed these days, but runs north from Adelaide out into the deserts towards Queensland. Now, the letter-winged kite is a specialist that eats inland rats, and when the rats plague, which they can do when we have wet seasons like we are at the moment, the letter-winged kites become very abundant. Unfortunately, they then find that once the plagues are over, there's not enough food. They can spread out and they can turn up all around Australia, but those birds that turn up on the coast then don't survive. It's only the resident population in the inland that seems to hang in there. And this time of the year, just early November, 5 years ago, I visited a site where I was able to see letter-winged kites, and you can see the photograph I was able to take of this extremely rare bird, and that photograph is actually in my new book, which is the Birds of Canberra and the High Country. The reason it's in that book is because it does occasionally turn up on the east coast and in the high country. So the letter-winged kite, an amazing nocturnal hawk of inland Australia. My third story involves a report about the northern bald ibis, or the Waldrapp. And I thank Chris for sending me and asked me a question on my emails where he says, tell me about this bird and what is it that is making it so exciting in Croatia at the moment, where they have seen one of these birds. And thanks, Chris, for sending that photo in. There's an amazing sighting that's just been made in Croatia of a bald ibis, northern bald ibis. It's often called the Waldrapp as well. Now, this bird has an amazing history. Up until the 15th century, it was a very widely dispersed bird across Central Europe and across into the Balkans, and those birds migrated every year down to Ethiopia. And there was a second small population in Morocco. In Austria in 1504, the bird was declared protected. Sadly, that didn't help, because by about the 18th century, the birds were essentially extinct in Central Europe. Small populations continued to exist in Turkey, where they were protected by a very curious connection they had with the Bible. And people believed that they were significant in the Bible, and in particular with Noah's Ark, and villagers protected the birds around the village. Sadly, in the 20th century, that tradition diminished and the birds became less common, and they weren't protected as much, and they became extinct. However, today there is a program with a handful of birds that are left and a reasonable population that's kept in zoos through Europe to reintroduce these birds to parts of Europe. There's one of the programs is the Rewilding Europe program, which is effectively releasing these birds to nest in castles in places in Bavaria. Berghausen is a famous example of that, and the birds are being not only reintroduced but being trained to migrate to Ethiopia as well, because they need to have that migratory pattern reinforced in the new young birds. An amazing story to try and save the Waldrapp, or the northern bald ibis in Europe. And I was so pleased to see that clip that Chris sent through to me concerning the bird that was seen in Croatia. I don't know what the origin of that bird is, but it's showing that these birds are turning up again in parts of Europe. So my last story today is about how many birds are there? How many birds are on the planet? How many individual birds do we have? And there's a recent study that's come out of the US where they've done an assessment and a program to try and work out actually how many birds there are on the planet. And the figure they've come up with is 50 billion birds. 50 billion birds. That's 6 birds for every human on the planet. Now, the way they've been able to do this calculation is they've taken the small areas where scientists have worked out in detail how many birds there are, and then they've used citizen science, which has collected data over much bigger areas, and done calculations from that, and then extrapolated from those bits of data to places where we have relatively little data. So this is the best estimate we currently have as to the number of birds that are on the planet, 50 million. And it's interesting to see which are the most common. There's 4 birds at least that are in the billion number class. There's a billion of them on the planet. One is the ring-billed gull of North America. A second is the barn swallow, which occurs right across Northern Europe and North America. And 2 species which are well known internationally. And they're the house sparrow and the European starling. Not only are these birds common in their native range, but both those species have been introduced to other parts of the world. And in particular, the house sparrow has been introduced to all the continents except Antarctica, and the starling has been introduced into North America. And interestingly, there's another biblical reference here. The first starlings that were introduced into North America from Europe were introduced in, I think it was 1890, into Central Park by people who wanted to reintroduce or introduce into North America all the birds of the Bible. So the European starling was introduced into Central Park in New York as part of that project. And now they are one of the most common birds on the planet. So thanks for watching and happy birding.